Have you ever heard a musical artist described as having great chops? What does that mean? Well, the term chops is slang in the music business that refers to an artist that has developed great skills over time, whether they are a musician, composer, producer, or other titles associated with the music business. This is Scott Grimaldi, your host of Got Chops. Join me as I interview one musical artist per episode that I've had the pleasure of either performing, recording, or work with in my career. Plus, I'll be interviewing artists I've always wanted to speak with. We'll discover how each artist developed their chops, listen to their stories, and much more. This is Got Chops. My special guest artist for today is recognized as a jazz and blues pianist who hails from Atlanta, Georgia. That's him playing on his album, The Upside of Down, recorded live a few years ago at Birdland Jazz Club in New York City. His playing has been praised by jazz pianists Ramsey and Les McCann, as well as by the legendary jazz journalist Nat Hentoff, who wrote liner notes on 3 of his albums. Downbeat Magazine said his sound is reminiscent of the great jazz pianists of the 1950s. Today's guest is also the executive director for the Neranenah Concert and Culture Series in Atlanta, Georgia, and wrote the liner notes for 3 of Wynton Marsalis' Jazz at Lincoln Center albums. This Southern jazz master of the ivories certainly got chops. Please welcome Joe Alterman. Good morning, Joe. This is Scott from Got Chops. How are you?
Oh, hey, Scott. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. For my audience, Joe Alterman hails from Atlanta, Georgia. He's a phenomenal blues and jazz piano player, and his style is described by many as reminiscent of great jazz piano players from the 1950s. Thank you again for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for wanting to chat.
As a musical artist, what does the musical slang "got chops" mean to you?
So to me, I guess to me, it's chops. I would usually refer to technique. They can get around the instrument. They can, when I think of someone who has chops, I think of, Oscar Peterson, Art Tatum, people like that. But I know sometimes it gets a negative rap that it's, only technique. But to me, someone like, Oscar Peterson, Art Tatum, these guys, they got technique, but you can feel it. So, I'm very lucky. One of my mentors is the great pianist, Ramsey. He says, technique is necessary, but it's only a means to an end, and music's that end. So, having chops is one thing, but the music's, the point.
Oh, that's great. I love what you said. And we'll be talking about those famous artists like Ramsey a little bit later on. I feel the same way. I think the word "got chops" has become more generic. Originally, as you know, it began as a phrase to describe what brass players do. But yeah, it's certainly beyond, technique. And the one thing I love about listening to you play is your groove. You have an incredible groove. So, you have great chops, technically, but when you play, you could really feel that you're in the pocket, and it's really, really fantastic to listen to and very enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot, really.
My pleasure. For my audience, for my young listeners, we have an audience of different age groups. Could you describe in your own words what a groove is?
Well, I guess it's whatever makes you tap your feet or bob your head or make you want to dance or move your shoulders. To me, the groove is, the thing that, when you can't sit still listening to music, the thing you're reacting to is the groove.
when you could do that in any type of music, you feel the groove. It's just, really exciting to listen to and be part of.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I know you're from Atlanta, Georgia. That's where you were raised. Is that where you were also born?
I was born and raised, yes, in Atlanta.
Okay. So do you come from a musical family?
I don't have musicians in my family, but I have a lot of. I mean, I have my older brother's a musician. He's a lawyer by day, but he's a great bluegrass finger picker, guitar player. My aunt was a great pianist, but for the most part, that was it. And we have a huge family, but our family does love listening to music. And my dad was, he's not a musician, but he's the one kind of responsible for turning me on to all this great music. So I don't come from a long line of musicians, but I do come from a family of music lovers and appreciators.
Well, that's great. So at what age did you begin to play and study music?
Well, so I asked my parents for piano lessons when I was about 3 or 4. I can't remember, and I can't remember why I asked them for lessons either. I don't know what inspired that, but they got me lessons, and I took a few and immediately hated it and wanted to quit, but they wouldn't let me. I think my dad saw something in me from a young age. Actually, right when I was born, the first thing he said is, "Look how long his fingers are. He's going to be a piano player." So basically, I started these lessons, and he wouldn't let me quit them. And so from about 4 or 5 to the age of 12, I was taking classical lessons, not really enjoying them, but always getting in trouble for changing notes. And at that point, I did not know anything about jazz. I didn't know, or improvisation. They were saying you're playing the wrong note. And I was saying, well, I like it like that. And they'd say, you can't do that. I didn't know there was any kind of music where you might be encouraged to do that. But basically at the time I was taking these lessons, and the music that I was enjoying listening to was really blues and bluegrass music. I still was not aware of jazz or anything like that. And I would go to a lot of bluegrass festivals in North Georgia, and
No kidding. Wow.
yeah, I'd hear a lot of these kind of traditional songs. And basically, what happened is I fell in love with a guitar player named Doc Watson. And Doc Watson is one of the great flat pickers, finger pickers, and he had a song called "Freight Train Boogie," which is basically a boogie woogie song on the guitar. And that changed everything for me, because from then I wanted to take guitar lessons and learn how to play that. And basically my dad made a deal with me that I can get guitar lessons, but I had to get my piano lessons. And I started taking these guitar lessons, and they were going okay, but the teacher said, boogie woogie music was written for the piano, and you can play the piano. So that's kind of what, finding that out and realizing that this is piano music is really what got me back into the piano. At the same time, my dad was buying records by Oscar Peterson, and he could tell I was getting into the jazz thing, and so he found things that resonated with me. From going to a bluegrass festival where you might hear a song like "You Are My Sunshine" to hearing Oscar Peterson play that or Monty Alexander play that. It's a natural transition for me. So thanks to Doc Watson and my dad that I got back into the piano and found a teacher who encouraged improvisation and things like that. I know that's a long ramble, but that's kind of it. Yeah.
That's a great story, how you transition from one to the other. And thank God for your dad to, recognize your talent and go, okay, he needs a structure of classical music, but he hears other things. So he investigated all that. That's great. And I mean, I don't know many dads that would be bringing home Oscar Peterson records and other things like that. But the interesting thing is the bluegrass. My wife and I have been to a number of different bluegrass festivals, and I've always walked away from that thinking, my God, some of these people, it's like they're playing Paganini, and they're just, incredible artists.
Oh, talk about chops. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
For real. Yeah. And I guess for me, one thing that's important to point out in my story is that it really wasn't, the improvisation that ever, even though I was changing notes, what really turned me onto the music was how the jazz people interpreted melodies that I already knew, like "You Are My Sunshine," for example, and things that Ahmad Jamal would do, and Ramsey and Les and stuff like that. And So to me, it was really, I knew the melody, and hearing how creative the jazz musicians or blues musicians could be with this song that I never, you know, knew you could do more with, was really big for me. So I always tell people I love the melody. I love to improvise, but I really love, you know, uh, playing with the melody.
Were you inspired by other instrumentalists as well that did not play piano?
Yeah. Well, I grew up playing along with like recordings of, people like Ben Webster and Coleman Hawkins and Houston Person. And I loved the tenor saxophone. um, and I could find a lot in bands like the Meters from New Orleans. I liked all the New Orleans thing always really appealed to me, the kind of New Orleans funk thing. So a lot of those guitar players and drummers, I feel like there's something special to take to take and learn from pretty much anyone. So definitely, I mean, I've been very inspired by people like Tom Waits or there's just different things from everyone. I guess getting to know so many of my heroes, which I've been so lucky, is, they definitely play they fit in the jazz genre, but they play their own music. So it's like, Charles Mingus used to say he played Mingus music. And I feel like the music of all these great musicians is really their music. Like when I listen to Oscar Peterson, I feel like it's jazz, but it's Oscar music. And so you hear really their perspective on the music and their perspective on life, and they're all bringing something different to it. So, so to me, there's always something unique to learn from everyone because everyone's different.
Absolutely. And that's when you become a stylist and recognize for, oh, yeah, I love the way Joe Alterman plays. I want you to play like him. I often share this type of philosophy with my students. And right now, I'm playing a couple of different Broadway shows. And sometimes, as you know, in the music, it'll say play a la, which means play like so and so. So I had a show recently where it said play a la David Sanborn. So if you don't know that style, you research it. You understand what kind of mouthpiece he's using, what kind of a volume or grit he's using. And absolutely, that ties into what you're saying. You're playing that person's style.
Totally. Yeah. I think that was one of the interesting things about going to jazz school in college was and it was kind of contradictory in a way. And I don't teach as much because of this, truthfully, but it was often, the goal here is to learn to be yourself. And then we'd get on the gig and every song was play like this guy, play like this guy, play like this guy. So it's I don't know what to make of that, but but it's something.
Well, before we talk about your time in music college, let me go back to when you were in school, middle school or high school. Did you play piano in the jazz bands or in any of the ensembles with your piano?
Well, it's funny. I went to two different high schools, and the first high school had a jazz band, but they didn't get together much. So they really put me in the concert band, but they didn't have piano in that. So I was playing like the timpani, and it was pretty much every song was hit a note and rest for 80 bars, right, and then hit a note again. So that wasn't it for me. And then I went to my new school, and they didn't have a jazz band. So I worked so hard for them to start one. So they finally started one. And I remember we got to the first rehearsal, and it was like 4 guys, but there was no bass player. And the teacher handed out the sheet music, which was Disco Inferno.
That's a real jazz standard, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that didn't work. I was lucky basically in high school. Since my high schools didn't really have jazz bands. I mean, all the schools were very supportive of me. I'd have independent studies where I could practice and things like that, but I didn't have places to play with others. So my piano teacher was the head of the jazz department at Emory University, and he put me in one of their combos. So I would go there once a week and play with those guys. So that was a great first experience. But yeah, Disco Inferno didn't cut it for me.
But there's another person that recognized your talent and said, hey, you need an opportunity to explore this. That's great.
Yeah.
So speaking about schooling, I read that you received your Bachelor of Arts and Master's degrees in jazz piano at NYU. So, share with my listeners the experience that you had when you studied there and maybe some influential music teachers that you studied with.
Yeah, well, it was those. I was at NYU for about 6 years total. I did, both undergrad and graduate degrees, and I think those are some of the best times of my life. I mean, because on the one hand, my piano teacher was Don Friedman. He was
Oh, wow.
one of the greats, and not, I guess you always hear this phrase like music is life or jazz is life or things like that, and I didn't really understand what that meant until I met him because, obviously he's a great piano player, but I mean, he sadly passed away, but I remember meeting him and we really hit it off, and we'd start to go to lunches and I'd go up to his apartment to, have more lunches or whatever. And I would just notice that he was probably the most content, fulfilled person I had ever met at that point into my life. And, growing up in Atlanta, I was around people who had more money than him and people who, had bigger houses and stuff, but I had never met anyone who seemed as content as him. And to me, the lesson was really like that, doing what he loved throughout his life has made him feel this way. And, he would be he was all about the music. I remember, he would tell me some celebrity would come to my gig and he would say, "Cool, how was the gig?"
That's more important.
Yeah. So it was, studying with him was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I mean, we really got close. Even after I graduated, we went to lunch once a week, and he was always a great friend and resource. And I still miss him a lot. He's really like my hero in life. But I mean, and then on the other hand, because we were in New York, we basically go to the second set of the Village Vanguard like once or twice a week. And that would be cool because, for example, I remember we were learning about Cedar Walton in one of my classes. So I went to the Vanguard to see Cedar Walton, and I told him what we were learning about him. And he told me with the truth, So it was cool because you get to meet the people you were learning about almost all the time. That was great. And I think, it also opened up a lot of opportunities for me being in New York. I quickly realized being in New York that if you want to get gigs, get work, you can't just be good at your instrument. You got to know people and, have connections and things like that. So I started taking every opportunity in the music business I could find. And, that was the most meaningful one for me, was working as an intern at the Blue Note Jazz Club for, many years. And I remember my first day on the job, someone came up to me, my boss, and he said, "Joe, can you just do us a huge favor? I'm sorry to impose." And I said, "What's the favor?" He says, "Man, McCoy Tyner is just all by himself. You go keep him company for a few hours."
Wow.
So to me, things like that. And, I went down, and at that point I was obsessed with Hank Jones, and I told McCoy that, and he said he was too. And he took me down to the piano and did a 20-minute Hank Jones impersonation on the piano. And
wow.
just things like that were incredible. But also at the same time, I was, in these classes, and, Don was great. The whole experience of meeting peers and making connections and everything was great. But there was a little disconnect I felt with some of the educational stuff because I realized you can't teach feeling. And so I guess, I understand that there's a way to teach improvisation, and a lot of it was like, here's 4 bars of chords, put a melody, here's the notes you can use under this, these chords. But I remember when I met Les McCann, for example, he was playing all the notes my teachers were saying you can't play, and it sounded good. So there would be a lot of talk of, and it's not a knock on anybody, but, we spent an entire semester studying Lenny Tristano, who's great, but we didn't talk at all about Errol Garner. And I felt like some of the piano players who gained some popularity were kind of put down. And it was just hard you just can't teach emotion. That's what I realized. So you got to compensate somehow. I don't know if I don't mean to sound negative at all. But that part was tricky.
We share the same feeling on this, and I speak about this with a number of other musicians that I respect and play with, and we all say the same thing. There's a whole crop of young musicians coming up that are doing technically things that were never considered years ago. Now, every saxophonist sounds like Michael Brecker. That could only be done by a few people, 30, 40 years ago. But when they play, you don't hear anything. I mean, you hear the
Right.
notes, but you don't feel anything. And when you try to tell them this, they look at you with a blank stare like, what are you talking about, man? I'm playing the best stuff in the world. Yes, you're a computer.
Yeah, and I mean, I had two kind of stories that I heard around this. I'd love to share with you if you want to hear.
Sure,
Uh,
absolutely.
well, one is just that one I read that from Branford Marsalis. He was in Art Blakey's band at the time, and apparently Blakey walked in on him rehearsing or practicing, and he said, what are you rehearsing or what are you practicing?" He said he's trying to get his Coltrane thing together or something, and Blakey said, and he was listening to some Coltrane and transcribing and all this stuff, and he said that Art Blakey said, "You think when Coltrane was trying to get his Coltrane thing together, he was listening to recordings of himself from the future?"
That's great.
But there's that, and then I don't say this as like a braggy thing. It just really changed how I see a lot of the stuff we're talking about. Is I was playing at a festival that George Benson was also on a few years ago, and he sat and listened to me play for like an hour, just solo piano. And afterward, he came up to me and he said, "You play good and you sound good, and there's a difference."
Oh, yes.
And that I hadn't thought of it in those terms before. So there's a lot of people that play good, but just I don't feel it. It doesn't sound good.
Oh, that's great. Wow. And coming from a master like that, they are really listening to you. And if they were wasting their time, they wouldn't be there. They're listening and go, man, this kid, this guy has got something.
Oh yeah, it was really special.
Oh my God. Let me go back to when you were an intern at the Blue Note.
Mm,
One of your duties was your association with jazz music critic Nat Henoff. If you can share that with my listeners.
oh yeah. Well, I grew up. He's my favorite writer. I feel like, you know, journalists often get a bad rap, and some very deservedly so. But someone like Nat, I would often tell him that I owed him so much because, I'd be reading the back of Sketches of Spain in the record store, which I'd never heard of. And the way he wrote about it made me want to listen to it. So he's responsible for turning me on to so much of the music I may not have discovered without reading his writings about it. But anyway, one of my first jobs as an intern at the Blue Note was to transcribe some interviews that Nat had conducted at the club. These were like Frank Sinatra Jr. I don't even remember. There was a bunch of them. But basically, word got back to me that he liked the my transcription style. So I knew where he lived because I would often drop the transcriptions with his doorman on my way home from working. And so basically what happened is I burned a CD of some of my music. I didn't have an actual album at the time. And I thought, I'll say I'm the guy that's been doing the transcription. Here's some of my music if you want to have a listen. And basically I went into the building. I gave the package to his doorman. And then I thought, as I was walking away, I thought, man, so many people must do this. This is Nat Hentoff. I should probably give the doorman a tip. And I was standing outside. I was so nervous deciding if I should leave a tip or not, that basically by the time I decided yes to leave the tip, I pulled the money out of my pocket and the doorman jumped. He thought I had a gun. I was that nervous.
Man.
I was like, no, it's like $4. That's all. And anyway, so so about a month later, I got a call from Nat, shockingly, and he said he really liked the album and he wanted to write about it. It was just a quick call, but he said, I'm going to write about this someday. And then we basically just started talking, and I'd call him once or twice a week. He'd call me once or twice a week, and we just really had a special friendship. He always told me he wished he could have introduced me to Willie the Lion Smith. He thought we would have gotten along well.
Wow.
Which I liked. But he was so special, and I called him on his 90th birthday, and he didn't pick up, and he called me back the next day, and he said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry I didn't get to you yesterday, but my wife asked me what I want for my birthday, and I said I want a day alone to write. So he was inspiring. Even when I'm honored that his last piece about music was actually written about me. And at that
Wow.
point, yeah, he couldn't. At that point, he couldn't write. He couldn't see very well,
Hmm.
and so basically, but he still wanted to write. So he actually dictated his articles to his son, who wrote them. So he was working up until the end, and he was great.
Wow.
I
Well,
loved him.
that whole story is very inspiring, and it goes back to what you said before. You were taught that music is life, life is music. And so it's more than just playing. You made a connection with someone that said, wow, this person has a heart and a soul and can play,
Mhm.
and notice some things that most people don't. Wow, we have some kind of thing that's, in common. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I remember. Can I share one more little Nat Hentoff thing with you?
Sure.
Uh, he did write about. He ended up writing about me 3 times, but the first time he wrote about me was 5 years after we first met, and it was in the Wall Street Journal. And he called me to say it was going to get in the journal, but he said it's going to get in within the next few days. But they've started this new process called peer editing, where all the other writers read what you wrote and edit it for you, which he didn't like. And he said they took out my intro paragraph, which is really important. And he said, "Give me 5 minutes." And he called me back 5 minutes later and said, "Paragraph's back in, but I don't work at the Journal anymore."
Oh, God.
Yeah, he was a fighter. he I loved him.
Wow. Well, yeah, he admired and respected you and saw you as someone as being very special and, someone that has it, as they say. So you also have a number of credits writing liner notes for the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra's albums with Wynton Marsalis, The Village Voice, including your own what you call memorable meetings as found on your website. In addition to being an outstanding musician, you also have a great skill as a literary writer and you hold the title of author. When did you become interested in writing? Was it because of the inspiration you got from Nat?
Well, I've always enjoyed writing. To me, it was kind of I wrote before I really got into music. I loved writing in high school, and basically, I mean, something that I don't often talk about, but I'll share with you is that you know I struggled with obsessive compulsive disorder in high school, like uh, not just I'm so OCD like you hear outside, but actually it was a really rough time in my life, and basically I didn't. I needed to get out a lot, feelings inside, and pretty much I didn't like telling my. And for those who don't know, like obsessive compulsive disorder, the way I had it, I wasn't a hand washer, but it would, I'd be taking a test, and it would be count to 80 times, things like that. So it took up a lot of time and in my head, and it was very difficult. And basically, I didn't want to tell my friends that I was dealing with anything because although they would have been helpful, I wouldn't have felt. I liked feeling normal and like nothing was wrong when I was around them. So basically, um, doing my whole day at school with the compulsions and faking that everything was okay was exhausting. So when I'd come home, the piano, that's when I really fell in love with the piano, because I'd be on the piano from like 4 p.m. to midnight, just playing rant, whatever came out. And it was more like an outlet to get my feelings out, which was helpful. And I still think when anyone tells me that my feeling has any music, it's thanks to that. My music has any feeling. It's thanks to that experience. But also at the same time, what had happened was this was probably like 2002, 2003, and there's more information about OCD out there now. But at the time, I really wanted to talk to somebody who had been through a similar experience. And I found a couple people, and they weren't willing to talk. They said and I don't, it's in the past. I'm not reopening that. And I was looking for a book about it that, might have like a journal of someone's, struggles as they went through it. And I couldn't find anything that wasn't fiction. And I was really frustrated that everything was a made up story about someone, not really going through this, but a fictional take on it. And so basically I said, I'm going to write my story down. And I kept a journal that I wrote in every day. that I still have. I mean, it's about 500 pages. I'll have to edit it down one day. But that's when I got into writing, because it was a way for me to hopefully one day share a story that I wish I had during that time. And I kind of realized I was kind of good at it. And and then when I moved to New York and started meeting these people, I also realized that a lot of my friends knew well-known musicians or people that like I was getting to know, but they didn't really have the great stories that I was getting. I don't know how I was getting all these great stories, but I thought I needed to document this stuff. And so I just started writing. And basically one day I showed Nat something that I had written, and he loved it. And he said, "You got to write more." And so he was really encouraging about the writing. But it wasn't until, I just wrote these things kind of for fun when I felt like it. And then I met Wynton Marsalis at an event at the University Club in New York, a private club where I interviewed him. And he said he'd like me to get involved more with some of the stuff he's doing. What would I like to do? And I thought, this is my chance. So I said, I'd love to write some more. So he gave me the opportunity to write for three of his albums, which was a great experience. But that's a long story, but that's the story.
That's incredible. But everything you're saying, since we started today's conversation, I can tell you have a way about you that makes everyone feel very comfortable, and you're genuine and honest and open, and you care. And these other artists who sometimes are only looked at because of the incredible notes they could play, and everyone else does not care about them as human beings. These people latch on to you because you have the whole package, and it's almost like your family. So bravo to you. That's great. I mean, everyone is encouraging you, and what great insight to write all that stuff down. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I used to think that all this stuff, like the Nat Hentoff article in the Wall Street Journal, it took 5 years from the day he called me to when it was published. And so originally I thought this happened because I was persistent. And then I really realized that, persistence is obviously a part of my story, but I think the thing that has really made this stuff happen is I'm just really curious about all the stuff. I really want to learn. And these people can feel that I'm not using them. I'm very sincere about my curiosity about them.
Exactly what I was just saying. That's right.
Yeah,
excellent.
Exactly.
Well,
yeah.
So let's talk about the times that you've shared the stage with some of your idols in the jazz world, like Houston Pearson, Les McCann, Ramsey Lewis, just to name a few, who have been quoted as saying incredible things about your playing. What was it like for you to perform for the first time side by side with these icons after many years of emulating their styles in improvised solos?
Well, it was really, I guess what really happened at first was that I was through my getting to know everyone at the Blue Note, through my internship, they got to know my music, and they gave me opportunities to open for people whose music they thought that person's audience might like my music. So people like Les McCann and Ramsey. And so basically, I was Ramsey's opening act for a while. So Ramsey and I haven't, shared a stage playing the piano at the same time, but we have, like, at his house and things like that, which has been amazing. But, with Les, I've done some gigs where, he's one of my favorite piano players ever, where I'm playing the piano and he's singing. And to me, that it's been an incredible, it's always been incredible to be around them and to be performing with them. I think, to me, like, the most, impressionable thing, or not difficult, but learning experience, was learning how to play in front of people that I idolized. That was really hard. I've opened for Hiromi at the Blue Note one time, and Ahmad Jamal came and sat in the front row, and I didn't know how to get out of my head, But then by the time I got to open for Les next, I was sound checking. He came in the club, he came up to the stage, and he didn't say, "Hey," he said, "Play me some blues, boy." And I was nervous, but after a few minutes, he said, "Amen." So I knew I was doing something okay. Then he said, "Are you what's your name?" I said, "Joe Alterman." He says, "Oh, are you a rabbi?" I said, "No." And he said, "Are you a Hebrew?" I said, "Yeah, I guess, yeah. So from now on, you're my Hebrew." And
great.
yes. But then he shared something with me. I told him about the experience in front of Ahmad, because, playing with these people has been incredible, but, like, just learning thing, how to play in front of them and not get self-conscious and, be you and be, don't worry, that was the hardest, or that was the biggest thing for me. And I remember I shared with Les about playing in front of Ahmad and how he's terrified. And he said, listen, he was playing at the London House in Chicago for his first big gig when he was in his mid-20s. And he was about to walk on stage, and Oscar Peterson walked in the audience. And he was like, oh my God, I can't do this. So we went over to Oscar's table and he said, Oscar, thanks so much for coming, but I can't play in front of you. And he said, Oscar said to him, I didn't come here to hear me. I came here to hear you.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, so just like to me, and that opened Les up forever, and that kind of opened me up too. It's okay to be you, should be you. So to me, it's obviously great to share a stage with anyone that I idolize, or just even to be in their presence. But learning how to deal with things like this have been, huge life moments for me, and hearing that story was a big one for me too.
Well, it's great how honest you are about how nerve-wracking it is to play, in front of, really well-known big artists. Bravo for, being that open. And I'm going to assume the same experience has happened to you, where you've heard some young people play and they're afraid to play in front of you because you have a well-known name right now.
I think so, and yeah, I mean they've been honest about it with me too, and I'll always be real with these younger people. Share the Ahmad story. I mean, I remember I was playing some song and I thought I was about to play this riff, and then I stopped myself because it came from one of Ahmad's recordings. And, so yeah, I'm always open and honest with, especially with the younger people who look up to me for some reason.
So you have a number of albums that are available on Spotify and other digital platforms as well. So let's talk about your most recent album from 2021, The Upside of Down, that was live at Birdland with your trio.
Yeah.
In addition to the jazz standards and original compositions you played, I love the cool arrangement of the Jewish song Oseh Shalom, which means He Who Makes Peace. It's a traditional song that is typically played at Jewish weddings or bat mitzvahs as a hora, or what we call a freilock, which is a lively Jewish dance. I know you know about this, but for my listeners, that's why I'm explaining it.
Yeah.
I love the much slower tempo that you start with, and you begin with these open fifths, perfect fifths, as we call them. That's a great riff on the piano that you started, and the stylistic influences of your piano idols that come through this arrangement. I can tell from the people that you're talking about. What was the inspiration to select this song, and what was it like for you to perform and record a live album at Birdland?
Well, it's interesting. The story around this song was basically came out of many conversations with Ramsey Lewis and Les McCann. And I remember Les was sharing with me one time how he felt like he plays jazz, but he said, you might call what I do gospel funk. And I remember really liking that. And both Les and Ramsey are, fascinated by the fact that, or I mean, not fascinated, but interested in the fact that I'm a Jewish guy who who's been really influenced by this gospel sound, but I've never been to church, And so they said, how fascinating that is, but you didn't grow like they grew up with those songs. And they said, the church songs and the gospel songs where I didn't. And they said it'd be really interesting, if you put this gospel influence on stuff you did grow up with. Like we grew up with Amazing Grace, like you grew up with, these Jewish songs. That was really my kind of effort to to see what I could do with some of the songs that I grew up with, similar to how they grew up with, some of the spirituals. So that's kind of that. But basically, the live album, I love recording live albums because, truthfully, I don't love being in the studio that much. I feed a lot off the audience, and I guess it's all work, of course, but I think being in the studio is not it's not as fun for me. It's becoming more fun, but I feel like I'll often record in the studio, and I'm more it comes off as a more tamed version of who I really am. I'm a little more hesitant in the studio. I don't.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it might have something to do with it's nice to play on a nice Steinway in the studio, but once you get it in the headphones, it sounds kind of like a keyboard, and I just feed so much off the live thing that I feel like it's really the best representation of what I actually sound like. So to me, what was great is I had like a 3 or 4 night run there, and I just recorded everything and then picked my favorite stuff. So it wasn't exactly high pressure, but I was in the right environment, and I knew I'd have a lot of material to choose from. So I kind of like working like that, but I want to challenge myself to get more comfortable in the studio as well.
Well, speaking about your live recording at Birdland, for my audience, you have to pick this up. I've listened to it. It's magnificent. And again, we go back to certain words we used before. Your grooves, your tasty playing, the way you're comping, everything is excellent. So yeah, I really recommend everyone to go pick it up and buy it.
No, thank you so much. Yes, I'm proud of this one.
You should be. So, speaking about the last song, the Jewish song "O Say Shalom," let's tie this in. Please share with my listeners your role as the executive director with Neranenah Concert and Culture Series, and that celebrates Jewish contributions to music. You were quoted as saying, "The Jewishness of the music is defined by its story and not necessarily its melody. It's part performance, part storytelling." That's great. Please explain.
Yeah. Well, basically, when I did move back to Atlanta about 6 years ago, and just kind of my home base where I want to live. And I realized after moving back that things like being an intern at the Blue Note, just to help me get gigs, was work I loved and I missed. And so I was looking for something else to do in addition to playing the piano. And there was something in Atlanta at the time called the Atlanta Jewish Music Festival. And I wasn't really into a lot of the programming, but I didn't have anything else to do. So I met with the then executive director of that, and really just to see if he had contacts in Atlanta for some other kind of music related thing. And he said, no, but he wants to step down if I want to take this over. And I thought I'll shadow him for a little while and see what it's like. And it was basically one day it occurred to me when I asked him, I just had I thought, what is Jewish music? Like, what is this? And so I asked him, and he said, it's a Jew playing music, a Jew who plays music. And I thought, I don't know if I agree with that, but that explains, why I wasn't so into the programming up till then. It was more, come see a Jewish person play music versus, something a little more deep or more meaningful. So I thought, I want to find out what Jewish music is. And then I could probably do this, and then we'll be cool. And then, so I meet with 300 people and I asked them all, what is Jewish music? And I literally got 300 different answers, and they were all right, but none of them were right at the same time, in my opinion. I could get, it's anything from Israel, and I'd show them a Taylor Swift cover band from Israel. And then they'd say it's anything in Hebrew, and I'd show them a band that sings Johnny Cash tunes in Hebrew. And then, it's anything based on the Old Testament. So I'd say Black spirituals, and, basically my takeaway was that when you hear the word Jewish music, a lot of people's preconceived notion is they think klezmer music. But if you like klezmer music, you're going to search for klezmer concerts. You're not searching for Jewish music concerts. So to me, the word Jewish music is just not a genre of music. But, when we look at American music, there's, so much, especially with the African-American Jewish relationship in the music. There's these fascinating stories about the creation of American popular music, especially in the 20th century. And so, I mentioned this to Wynton at one time we met, and he said, Jewish music, interesting, not really a thing, but all over American music. I thought, exactly. And so basically, I decided I'm not going to use the word Jewish music. I started to use the word Jewish contributions to music, which made it, we needed to change the name. I remember, just as a quick aside, if you don't mind, one of the most interesting "What is Jewish music" conversations I had was with George Wein, the founder of the Newport festivals.
Sure.
And he, he was a really tough Jewish guy from Boston, in the 1920s. And I said, "What is Jewish music?" And he said, "Cole Porter." And I said, "What?" He's one of the only people in that crew who was not Jewish. And George Wein said, "Yeah, but he understood that at the time he was writing for Broadway was new, and about 80% of the audience that was coming to Broadway shows were Jewish people who were into Yiddish theater on the Lower East Side. So Cole Porter had to write with that in mind. He was writing for that audience, whereas Harold Arlen's dad was a cantor, but he wasn't. It might have been there wasn't potentially anything Jewish about the story. So to me, that was a good takeaway or conversation to have, and it just made me realize this is it's bigger than I think it is, and it's the confusion around the term what is Jewish music shouldn't be like avoided. It should be embraced. And I wanted to. So basically, Neranenah comes from a Jewish song of celebration called Hava Nagila. It means let's all come together and sing. So to me, this is a Jewish organization that I work for, but music's for everyone, and these stories are for everyone, and this has to reflect that. So that's the long version of how we got to that.
That's great. Let me pick your brain here for a little bit. Your idols, they don't care what your background is. You don't care what their background or race or color is. What is coming through you is the music. You feel it, you understand it, versus stereotypes. Okay, well, let's see. I remember when you mentioned Wynton Marsalis, when he came on the scene, oh my God, what an incredible jazz player. And then you heard him play classical. And then we heard some rumblings from the music industry like, no, that's not the image we want to portray as a classical musician. And it's like, what are you talking about? That's disgusting. How can you think that way?
Oh, totally. I mean, Ramsey Lewis, when he turned 80, he had a piano concerto with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra debut. And I remember calling him, and this was when, Obama was still president. And I said, "Ramsey, how was it?" He said, "I got to tell you the story." And he said, he grew up in Chicago wanting to be a classical pianist, performing with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And he put his 17 years in or whatever. He was on the level of a concert pianist. But his teacher told him and his parents that, he's there, but it's not going to happen because there were no opportunities for Black people in classical music at the time. Man. So he found jazz, but 65 years later, he's basically getting to play with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the dream he had all along, and to play his own piano concerto. And he said, he's about to walk on stage. There's 20,000 people in the audience, or 18,000. And they say, "Ramsey, you can't go on." He thought, oh no, is the dream shattered? And they said, no, we have a surprise. And basically at that moment, the screen came down and Obama was giving a speech to the crowd about Ramsey.
Wow.
And at that point in the conversation, Ramsey got kind of emotional with me about, how he wishes his parents could have been there. I mean, he couldn't become a classical pianist because of his color, and he finally was. And there was the Black president on the screen talking about how he's a national treasure of the city of Chicago.
Wow.
I mean, to me, that's just one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard,
Wow. Love these stories. They're all heartwarming and inspiring. So please talk about the other albums that you have on Spotify and the other platforms. And if you wouldn't mind, could you mention your 2 top audio tracks that I will be able to filter in excerpts during this interview that you haven't spoke about earlier today, in order to give my audience a sense of who you are as a performer, a composer, arranger. Thus, I want to drive my audience to listen and download your music.
No, thank you. Well, basically, I have 4 other ones, and one is called Piano Tracks, and that's my very first one. And, that's actually the one that I had just recorded and burned a copy and gave to Nat Hentoff. And then after he liked it, I decided to put it out. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's painful for me to listen to, but it's, I've thankfully grown a lot since then. But then I did one called Georgia Sunset, and Houston Person produced that and played with me on a few songs on that. That was really, really special. I do think, my song Georgia Sunset, maybe not even that version, maybe the one that's from the album More Cornbread a little later, really is a good example of who I am as a composer. It's got a little country something in it. More Cornbread is the title of another one of my albums. It's another live album. And that was basically a way of saying Southern jazz without saying Southern jazz. People, know. Yeah. And so I'm proud of that one for sure. Another one is called Coming Home to You that I'm also proud of. I recorded that right before I moved back to Atlanta from New York. And that song, Coming Home to You, that I wrote actually came to me the night that I decided to move. I can barely play a gig without someone requesting our version of Heard It Through the Grapevine, which is on there.
That's a great one. I've heard that track. That's really great. And it's funny you should say that, because on Ose Shalom, your opening was kind of indicative of that type of style, or the openness of the fifths.
It's interesting you point that out, because that was actually part of the inspiration for the Ose Shalom. Was basically, luckily, I mean, people love this grapevine thing, but I've always realized, I don't want to play the same songs every show. So I thought I need to get something that could be the next grapevine. And so that was part of the thinking when I was doing Ose Shalom, was it's kind of got this vibe. Maybe if I develop it a certain way, this could be something I could play instead of Heard It Through the Grapevine at a show.
And to tie in the theory aspect of this for my listeners, and I know you'll probably agree with this, when you're in classical music and you're studying theory and harmony, the professors, the theory and harmony professors, poo-poo any open fifths or, parallel fourths, right?
Oh, yeah.
In pop music, that works quite well.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering about your classical teachers, if they've listened to you and your rendition of Ose Shalom and what they're thinking, knowing that it works, but they're secretly a little annoyed that you're using open parallel fifths.
I haven't heard anything. I mean, I do get a couple messages from people that are occasionally, you should be doing this, and
Really? You're kidding? Wow.
Well, I mean, not really, but I mean, occasionally. But I mean, to me, that's okay. But they're missing the point. I said,
Oh
this
boy.
is how I feel the song. So if you want to do it, you can do it that way. But
Wow, that's amazing. You've made it as a performer, as an artist, and people are telling you, well, you should really do this. Whew. Oh, I have no words.
it's weird. I mean, I put up something a week ago or two. I've been playing around with some kind of pop tunes, and so I've been playing with like your song, Elton John, and I put something up, and a lot of people liked it. And like some guy wrote me something about you're playing these quasi blues riffs on a melody where you should just be playing the melody. I said, well, you're missing the point.
Oh
That's how I
man.
hear this. You can play it that way, how you hear it, but the beauty is that everyone brings their own thing to it, and I really believe that. So it's
Oh
okay
man.
when you. It's okay. Yeah.
Wow, I have so many things to say about that, but I'll hold my thoughts. Well,
But it's okay. I think that's a big part about being in this business is learning how to get, it toughens you up to be more strong about who you want to be or who you are.
as a musical artist, how important is the use of social media to you?
Well, unfortunately, it's important. I mean, I think it's really, I'm not. I mean, I'm active on social media. I often tell people that if I wasn't a musician, I probably wouldn't have it, which is the truth. It's I don't it's not my favorite thing in the world, but I do think that today it's kind of become kind of a necessary part of doing this in a weird, kind of sad way. And I say it's sad because I feel like such a I remember when I moved to New York in like 2007, a lot of the legends were still around and gigging, like Hank Jones. And to me, there was something like there's this mystery about all these great jazz musicians that, helps make them so legendary to me. And so to me, it's, once everyone got on Facebook and you could see what everyone was eating for, dinner, it took away from the mystery that gave so much to this stuff to me. So to me, it's like, if Miles Davis had to promote his gigs on Facebook, I don't think it would be the same. We wouldn't have the same image of him today.
Amen.
Um,
Amen.
yeah. But at the same time, it's, I'm just curious where this all goes, especially post COVID. It's like, like make the joke, but it's a sad joke. It's like, if you have a gig, but you didn't post about it, did you have a gig? I don't know. I mean, it's tricky.
Do you have an interesting or funny story you can share about any of the artists you've worked with?
Oh, I have many. Yeah. Well, to me, I feel like Les McCann could have been a stand-up comedian. I mean, he's the funniest person I've ever met and heard stories from. And well, I guess I'll tell a good Les McCann story. I guess I have to preface these stories with, is it bad to have a cuss word in these
Well,
podcasts?
I try to stay away from it.
Okay. Well, that takes Les McCann off the table. No, I'm just
Okay,
kidding.
or unless you want to describe the cuss word.
Well, okay. Well, I'll just tell you this one because this one cracked me up, and it ties into the Jewish thing and what we were
Okay.
talking about. So, Les called me one Jewish holiday and asked me if I'd went to synagogue with my family, and I said yeah. And I said, Les, did you ever go to synagogue? And he said, yeah. One of my favorite stories happened at a synagogue. And he told me that basically back in the day there was this club in L.A. I think it was the Lighthouse, he said, owned by this Jewish guy that him and all of his fellow black musicians loved. And the guy died, so they went to his funeral at a synagogue. And and the rabbi's giving the eulogy, and he's going on about this guy, John Levine, John Levine, John Levine. And then all of a sudden, you hear Leroy Vinegar, who's Les's bass player, yell from the back of the synagogue, "It's Levine, MF."
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, that worked. I love that story.
Do you have any musical or life philosophies or catchphrases that you live by?
Well, I always tell people I get a lot of younger musicians who seem, bummed that they don't have bigger gigs. And to me, I always tell everyone, patience and persistence. I'll never forget. I'll just share one final story if that's okay, because this was a
Absolutely.
big thing for me. I remember being at that point in my life and career when I was in New York and basically just playing background gigs at restaurants. And I was kind of complaining about that too. And one night I went to see Bill Charlap at the Village Vanguard, and we were sitting together before he went on stage. And I'm looking out in the audience saying, God, this is amazing. Like, all these people are here to listen to him. They're going to be quiet. They're going to pay attention. He's playing at the best jazz club in the world. And we're talking. And he said, so what kind of gigs are you playing lately? And I said, something like, these restaurant background gigs. And right then he had to walk on stage, and he said, Joe, I missed those. And he says, you will too. And one day, and he walked on stage at the Vanguard, and I didn't get it for a long time, what he was talking about. But yeah, that was really impressionable to me, to just try to enjoy the journey and not to, and be very, persistent about the things you want, but to not be wishing you were somewhere else.
A lot of truth in that. And as you get older, we realize that as musicians and artists. So yes, for the young listeners, you just have to wait and experience what we've experienced. Do you have any upcoming live performances or projects you'd like to announce? And where can my listeners find you on, we have to say the word, social media?
Yes. Well, I got a lot coming up, especially this fall. I'll be traveling a lot. But I am working on a couple upcoming albums. One is actually a solo album. And one, we're hopefully going to get it out, is something with Houston Person again, a live album. But hopefully that happens. But in the meantime, I am on the internet. My website's joealtermanmusic.com. And I'm on all the, Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff at Joe Alterman. And I've tried to put stuff up a few times a week. So there's, there's some good stuff there, I think, if you want to check it out. But yeah, either the website, I'm also on Spotify, all this stuff. I think I'm on all the things.
Well, I hope we can speak in the near future or see each other, live in concert somewhere.
That'd be great.
Thank you once again, Joe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining me on today's show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and could hear why my guest got chops. You can follow my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Anchor.fm, and stay connected between episodes on Instagram at Got Chops Podcast. Join me on the next episode when we discover why my next guest got chops.